The water surged around Eleanor Sinclair's waist, ice cold and unforgiving. The spring storm had turned the usually placid creek into a raging torrent, and now it threatened to claim both man and beast. 20 feet ahead, Nathan Hayes thrashed against the current, one arm locked around a terrified calf, the other grasping desperately at a half-submerged log. "Nathan!" Ellie screamed, but the howling wind tore her voice away. She took another step, the muddy bottom shifting treacherously beneath her boots. The water was deeper than she'd expected, already reaching her ribs, soaking the worn cotton of her work dress. Each step required all her strength as the creek fought to sweep her downstream. Nathan's head disappeared beneath the surface, then reemerged. His face, usually composed and unreadable, now showed raw panic. Not for himself, Ellie realized, but for the bawling calf still clutched against his chest. Without hesitation, Ellie grabbed a protruding root for stability and pushed forward. When Nathan spotted her, his gray eyes widened in dismay. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice barely audible above the storm. Instead, Ellie pressed on until she reached him. "Together!" she called, her hand finding his shoulder. "We'll do it together." For a heartbeat, Nathan stared at her. Soaked, mud-streaked, stubborn Eleanor Sinclair, who had appeared in his life less than a month ago. A woman who had every reason to stand safely on the bank, yet had plunged into danger without hesitation. Something flashed in his eyes then, recognition, perhaps, or understanding, and he nodded once. Working in unison, they maneuvered the frightened calf toward the bank. The animal kicked and struggled, its terror making the rescue all the more perilous. Just as they neared safety, the log Nathan had been using for support shifted. The current caught him off balance, and Ellie watched in horror as he went under. Her hands shot out instinctively, fingers tangling in the rough fabric of his shirt. She pulled with strength born of desperation, but the current was winning. Just when her grip began to fail, another pair of hands reached past her. Michael, Nathan's young ranch hand, had made it down the bank. Together, they dragged Nathan to shallower water. All three collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping for breath, while the rescued calf scrambled away on wobbling legs. "Damn fool thing to do," Nathan coughed, water streaming from his dark hair. Ellie couldn't tell if he meant his actions or hers. "Yes," she agreed, her fingers still clutching his soaked shirt. It was. As Nathan's eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them. A connection forged in shared danger, in mutual stubborn determination. He looked at her differently now, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "Not all sisters are alike, are they?" he said quietly. The weight of those words hung between them, heavier than the sodden clothes dragging at their limbs. 3 weeks ago, Eleanor Sinclair had been a stranger, a desperate replacement, an unwelcome necessity. Now, drenched and shivering in the Wyoming rain, she had become something else entirely, something neither of them had expected to find. 3 weeks earlier, the morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of the Sinclair farmhouse, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Eleanor stood at the kitchen sink, her calloused hands scrubbing yesterday's dishes with methodical precision. Outside, the Nebraska prairie stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden glow of early spring. Beautiful but unforgiving, much like the life it offered. At 24, Ellie had long accepted her place in the world. Not pretty enough to attract suitors, too outspoken to be considered properly feminine, she had become indispensable in ways that earned respect, but rarely affection. Her strength in the fields rivaled any farmhand's. Her practical knowledge of crops and livestock exceeded her father's, and her sharp mind kept the farm's meager finances from complete ruin. All this, and yet she remained invisible in the ways that seemed to matter most to others. "Ellie, where's breakfast?" Her father's voice boomed from the sitting room, where he sat massaging his left leg, or rather, what remained of it. William Sinclair had returned from the war with half a limb and twice the temper, his body broken but his pride intact. "Coming, Pa." Ellie dried her hands on her apron and moved to the stove, where bacon sizzled in the cast-iron pan. Her mother, Martha, entered the kitchen, her once fine hands now reddened from lye soap and hard work. Born to a merchant family in Boston, Martha Sinclair had married for love, only to find herself transplanted to this harsh frontier life. 25 years had worn away her refined accent, but not her regrets. which seeped through in small sighs and distant gazes toward the eastern horizon. "Is Victoria still abed?" Martha asked, arranging cups on a tray. "Of course she is." Ellie couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Heaven forbid Vicky rise before the sun's properly up." "Mind your tone," Martha warned. "Your sister needs her rest. She was up late writing letters." To her suitor, no doubt. Ellie bit back the retort. Victoria Sinclair, at 20, possessed everything Ellie lacked: golden hair that caught the light, a complexion unmarred by sun and wind, and a laugh that made men turn their heads in church. She was their parents' treasure, carefully preserved from hard labor and harsh weather, groomed for a marriage that would elevate the family's standing. Ellie carried the breakfast tray into the sitting room. Her father sat by the cold hearth, his wooden crutch propped against the wall. Despite the spring warmth, a blanket covered his legs, hiding the absence he had never learned to accept. "Mail came early," William said, gesturing to a small stack of letters on the side table. "One from that rancher in Wyoming. Seems mighty eager." Ellie set down the tray, her heart sinking. The rancher in Wyoming was Nathan Hayes, owner of the Whispering Pines Ranch, who had advertised for a wife some months ago. Vicky had been exchanging letters with him since January, carefully crafting her responses with their mother's help, painting herself as the perfect frontier bride. It was a calculated arrangement. Nathan Hayes owned land and cattle, while the Sinclairs offered their precious daughter, a worthy exchange in William's eyes. The fact that Vicky had never cooked a meal, mended a fence, or birthed a calf was conveniently omitted from her letters. "He sent money for the train ticket," William continued. "Wants Vicky there by month's end." "So soon?" Martha's hand fluttered to her throat. "Man doesn't want to wait through another planting season alone." "Can't blame him." William picked up his coffee cup. "Besides, we need this to happen now." The gravity in his tone made Ellie look up. "What do you mean, Pa?" William's jaw tightened. "Bank's calling in our loan. We've got 60 days to make good or we lose the farm." The words landed like stones. Ellie knew they'd been struggling: bad harvests, poor prices, her father's inability to work the fields himself, but she hadn't realized how dire their situation had become. "How much?" she asked. "More than we have, more than we can get, without help." William's gaze drifted toward the stairs, where the sound of Victoria's footsteps could now be heard. "That's why this marriage needs to happen. Hayes is established. His last letter mentioned expanding his herd. He can help us weather this for his new bride's family." Ellie felt a familiar bitterness rise. Once again, Vicky's beauty would be their salvation. Once again, Ellie's years of back-breaking work amounted to less than her sister's pretty face and practiced charm. Victoria descended the stairs in a rustle of blue cotton, her golden hair arranged in loose curls despite the early hour. She kissed their father's cheek and accepted a cup of coffee from Martha with a smile that dimmed considerably when she noticed the letter from Wyoming. "Another one," she sighed. "The man is positively smothering me with attention." "As he should be, Mr. Vermeer," William said firmly. "He sent money for your passage. You'll be leaving next week." Victoria's cup clattered against its saucer. "Next week? But that's impossible. I can't possibly be ready." "You'll be ready," William cut her off. "This isn't a request, Victoria. The arrangements are made." "But—" Victoria's blue eyes filled with calculated tears. "I thought we'd have more time to prepare, to say proper goodbyes." To James Parker, Ellie thought. The banker's son had been calling on Victoria for weeks, bringing small gifts and meaningful glances. Ellie had seen them whispering behind the church after Sunday services, their heads bent close together. "You've had time enough," William said. 4 months of correspondence." The man's waited patiently. "At least let me finish breakfast before discussing my exile," Victoria murmured, accepting a plate from Ellie with a martyred expression. After breakfast, Ellie escaped to the barn. The familiar smells of hay and livestock were comforting as she set about her morning chores. She had just finished milking the cow when she heard hushed voices outside. "Can't go through with it, geez," Victoria's voice desperate and pleading. "Pa says I'm to leave next week." "Then we must act quickly." The measured tones of James Parker, the banker's son. At 28, he carried himself with the entitled confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I've spoken with Father. He's willing to extend the loan if..." "If what?" Victoria sounded breathless. If you break this engagement to Hayes, Father sees the strategic advantage of joining our families. Ellie moved closer to the barn door, careful to stay hidden. But Pa will never agree, Victoria said. He's set on this Wyoming arrangement. He believes Mr. Hayes will save the farm. And I will, James replied smoothly. Father has connections with the railroad company. This land will be worth twice its current value once the new line comes through. We simply need to ensure it stays in the family. Our family, Victoria whispered. Precisely. Tell your father I'll call tomorrow to discuss terms. This Wyoming fellow need never know why you've changed your mind. Their footsteps retreated, leaving Ellie standing in the shadow barn with the cold realization that her sister's apparent sacrifice had never been genuine. Victoria had been playing both sides all along, waiting to see which man offered the better prospect. And now she intended to break her commitment to Nathan Hayes without a second thought, using James Parker's influence to secure the farm while abandoning the man who'd been promised her hand. Ellie carried this knowledge with her throughout the day, watching as Victoria floated through the house with renewed energy, humming as she carefully avoided their father's questioning looks. That evening, when Victoria announced she needed to visit her friend Emma in town, Ellie knew exactly where her sister was truly headed. Following a hunch, Ellie slipped into Victoria's room after she'd left. In the drawer of the small writing desk, beneath carefully folded handkerchiefs, she found what she was looking for. Nathan Hayes's letters, bundled together with a blue ribbon. Beside them lay a smaller stack. The drafts of Victoria's responses, written in their mother's elegant hand, then copied by Victoria and sent to Wyoming. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. Hayes's letters were straightforward, honest accounts of his life and ranch. He wrote of his daily work, the challenges of the frontier, his hopes for the future. Between the practical lines emerged a portrait of a solitary man seeking connection, someone who valued hard work and honesty above all. The responses Victoria had sent were masterpieces of deception. They painted her as industrious, practical, and eager to embrace frontier life. Her supposed enthusiasm for gardening, cooking, and animal husbandry would have been laughable to anyone who knew the real Victoria, who complained if asked to gather eggs from the henhouse. A noise from downstairs startled Ellie. She quickly replaced the letters, but not before noticing something else in the drawer, a newspaper clipping about Nathan Hayes. It was yellowed with age, dated 1865, with the headline, "Soldier Refuses Orders, Unit Suffers Casualties." The brief article described how Sergeant Nathan Hayes had displayed cowardice in the face of enemy action, resulting in the deaths of several men in his unit. There were few details, only vague mentions of dereliction of duty and court-martial proceedings. Ellie slipped the clipping into her pocket just as Victoria's voice carried up the stairs. She was home earlier than expected, and she wasn't alone. "Pa, Mr. Parker has come to speak with you," Victoria called, her voice syrupy sweet with triumph. William's gruff reply was indistinct, but his tone suggested reluctance. Ellie crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the sitting room where James Parker now stood, hat in hand, his posture that of a man confident in his position. "Mr. Sinclair," he began without preamble, "I've come to discuss a matter of mutual benefit." Over the next half hour, Ellie watched the future of her family unfold in the parlor below. Parker laid out his proposal. He would marry Victoria within the month, his father would extend the loan indefinitely, and the Sinclairs could maintain ownership of their land, under the Parker family's guidance, of course. "And what of my commitment to Nathan Hayes?" William asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "A simple misunderstanding," Parker waved dismissively. Victoria was too hasty in her acceptance. "These things happen. The man will find another bride. After she's taken his money for travel, after months of promises?" William's face darkened. "The Sinclairs don't break their word, Mr. Parker." A noble sentiment. Parker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But perhaps impractical given your current circumstances." The implication hung in the air. "Accept our terms or lose everything." Victoria glided forward, taking her father's hand. "Please, Pa, I cannot bear to leave you all. And Mr. Parker has been so kind, so understanding of our situation." William's gaze shifted between his daughter's pleading face and Parker's smug one. For a moment, Ellie thought he might agree. Then his eyes hardened. No, he said firmly. I gave my word to Hayes. The engagement stands. Father, be reasonable, Victoria began. I said no. William's fist crashed down on his armrest. We are not beggars or swindlers. Hayes sent good money in good faith, and he'll get what was promised. Parker's expression cooled. I had hoped you'd be more pragmatic, Mr. Sinclair. My father will be disappointed. Then disappoint him. William reached for his crutch. Now, if you'll excuse us, it's getting late. After Parker had gone, the house erupted in chaos. Victoria sobbed dramatically. Martha tried to soothe her, and William sat stone-faced by the fire. Ellie watched from the shadows of the stairwell, her mind racing. Her father had chosen honor over practicality. A noble choice, but one that might cost them everything. The girl will go to Wyoming as promised, William declared over Victoria's wails. We gave our word, and we'll keep it. I won't go, Victoria stamped her foot. You can't make me marry a man I don't love, a stranger in a wilderness. You should have considered that before exchanging letters and accepting his money, William growled. Then send it back. Tell him I've changed my mind. And then what? Watch the bank take our home? Watch your mother and sister starve? William's voice broke. This isn't just about you, Victoria. It never was. Victoria's sobs quieted to hiccuping breaths. There must be another way. A heavy silence fell. In that moment, Ellie knew what she had to do. She descended the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. There is another way, she said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. Send me instead. The words hung in the air, impossible to retract. William stared at his eldest daughter, confusion etched on his weathered face. You, he finally managed. Mr. Hayes has never met Victoria. He's seen only one photograph, and even that's not very clear. Ellie squared her shoulders. I can go in her place. Honor would be satisfied. The agreement kept. Don't be absurd, Victoria scoffed, though her tears had mysteriously dried. Mr. Hayes is expecting a beautiful, refined bride. He'd send you back on the next train. The barb struck home, but Ellie kept her expression neutral. Perhaps, but unlike you, I can actually do the things you've claimed in your letters. I can cook, garden, tend livestock. I'm not afraid of hard work. William's brow furrowed as he considered the proposal. It would be dishonest. More dishonest than breaking your word entirely. More dishonest than the letters Victoria's been sending? Ellie challenged. I'll tell him the truth when I arrive. Let him decide then. A terrible silence followed. Martha looked between her daughters, her expression torn. Victoria's initial disdain had transformed into something calculating. It could work, she said slowly. Ellie's right. He's never actually seen me, and she is sturdy, better suited to frontier life. Sturdy, the word twisted like a knife, not beautiful, not desirable, just sturdy, like a reliable workhorse. William studied Ellie for a long moment. You'd do this? Travel alone to Wyoming? Marry a stranger? If it saves the farm, yes. Ellie met his gaze steadily. I'll go, tell him the truth, and accept his decision. Either way, the Sinclair word will be kept. Another long silence followed. Finally, William nodded once, a sharp gesture of decision. So be it, he said. Eleanor will go to Wyoming. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Ellie packed her few possessions into a small trunk, practical dresses of sturdy cotton, a worn Bible, her mother's handkerchief embroidered with violets. Victoria, reveling in her reprieve, became almost generous, offering Ellie a bottle of lavender water and advice on managing her unruly brown hair. You should pin it up like this, Victoria demonstrated, her fingers deftly arranging Ellie's thick locks. It makes your face look less angular. Ellie endured these helpful suggestions with gritted teeth, reminding herself that in a week she'd be hundreds of miles away from her sister's backhanded compliments. The night before her departure, Ellie sat alone in the kitchen, reading through Nathan Hayes's letters once more. Victoria had surrendered them without protest, along with the carefully crafted responses Ellie would need to understand what had been promised. Between the lines of Hayes' straightforward prose, Ellie sensed a man of principle, someone who valued honesty and hard work. He mentioned his ranch with quiet pride, describing the house he'd built with his own hands, the small orchard he'd planted, The herd he was gradually expanding. There were gaps, though, no mention of family except a brief reference to a sister, no details about his past before Wyoming. The newspaper clipping Ellie had found suggested why. If Hayes had indeed been court-martialed for cowardice, it would explain his isolated existence in the territories. Still up? Her father's voice startled her. William stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his crutch. Just preparing. Ellie folded the letters. I should know what he's expecting. William lowered himself into a chair across from her. In the lamplight, his face looked older, the lines deeper, gray streaking the beard that had once been as dark as Ellie's hair. I never thought it would come to this, he said quietly. Sending you away to marry a man you've never met. It's my choice, Pa. Is it? William's gaze was shrewd. Or is it just another burden you're shouldering because no one else will? Ellie had no answer for that. You've always been the strong one, William continued. Even as a girl, after I came home from the war, broken and useless. You're not useless, Ellie protested. William waved her off. I couldn't work the fields, could barely look your mother in the eye, but you were only 12, and you stepped right in, never complained, just did what needed doing. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. I've taken advantage of that strength. We all have. Ellie felt tears threatening and blinked them away. The farm needs saving. The farm, William snorted, a patch of stubborn dirt that's given us nothing but calluses and heartache. He squeezed her hand. Listen to me, Eleanor. When you get to Wyoming, you tell this Hayes fellow the truth right away. If he's worth a damn, he'll appreciate honesty. If not, he hesitated. If not, you write me. I'll find a way to bring you home. And the farm? A shadow crossed William's face. Some things can't be saved, no matter how hard we try to. The next morning dawned clear and cool. The family gathered on the station platform, their breath forming small clouds in the April air. Martha fussed with Ellie's collar, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You have the address to write to us and enough money for emergencies? She asked for the third time. Yes, Ma, I'll be fine. Ellie managed a reassuring smile. Victoria stood slightly apart, beautiful in her blue wool coat, watching the arriving train with fascination. At the last moment, she turned to Ellie. Good luck, sister, she said, her voice low enough that their parents couldn't hear. Though I doubt Mr. Hayes will keep you once he sees what he's getting instead of me. Ellie held her sister's gaze. Maybe not, but at least I'll have been honest with him, something you never were. Victoria's smile faltered. All aboard, the conductor called. William pulled Ellie into a rough embrace. Remember what I said. Write if you need to come home. I will, Pa. Ellie hugged him tightly, then her mother, before climbing the steps into the coach. As the train lurched forward, she looked back one last time. Her family stood on the platform, William leaning on his crutch, Martha waving a handkerchief, Victoria already turning away. The scene diminished as the train gathered speed, until they were just three figures on a platform, then specks, then gone. Ellie settled into her seat, feeling strangely light. For better or worse, she had left behind the only life she'd ever known. The journey stretched endlessly across the changing landscape. Nebraska's familiar plains gave way to the rolling hills of eastern Wyoming, which in turn yielded to the dramatic mountain ranges of the west. At each stop, passengers departed and new ones boarded, their faces blurring together in Ellie's exhaustion. On the second day, an elderly woman in a black bombazine dress took the seat beside her. Margaret Cooper, she introduced herself with a firm handshake. Heading to Laramie to visit my daughter. Eleanor Sinclair, Ellie replied. Going to Whispering Pines Ranch near Cheyenne. Mrs. Cooper's shrewd eyes assessed her. Ah, one of those arrangements, is it? Ellie tensed. Pardon? Mail-order bride, Mrs. Cooper said matter-of-factly. No need to be embarrassed, dear. It's common enough out here. My late husband was a judge. Saw plenty of such marriages. Some work out splendidly, others, she shrugged expressively. Ellie found herself confiding in this straight-talking stranger, sharing a simplified version of her situation. The correspondence, her sister's change of heart, her own substitution. Mrs. Cooper listened without interruption, then nodded thoughtfully. Bold move, telling the truth right away. Most would keep up the pretense until the knot was tied. She patted Ellie's hand. I approve. Marriages built on lies rarely stand the test of time, especially out here. You don't think he'll send me back immediately? Ellie asked. Can't say. Depends on the man. Mrs. Cooper's gaze sharpened. Tell me about him. This Nathan Hayes. Ellie hesitated, then reached into her bag for the newspaper clipping. I found this among my sister's things. It's the only information I have about his past. Mrs. Cooper studied the yellowed paper, her expression grave. Court-martialed for cowardice, she murmured. Serious charge for a soldier. Could it be true? Ellie asked. Truth is rarely simple, especially in wartime. Mrs. Cooper returned the clipping. My husband used to say, there are 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and what actually happened. Best reserve judgment until you have heard his side. They lapsed into companionable silence as the train clattered westward. Through the window, Ellie watched the landscape transform. The mountains loomed larger, their snow-capped peaks stark against the blue sky. Forests of pine and spruce replaced the open grasslands. It was beautiful, when, and utterly foreign. How will you recognize him? Mrs. Cooper asked suddenly. You're Mr. Hayes. He described himself as tall with dark hair, said he'd be wearing a black hat, Ellie replied. Though I suppose the real question is whether he'll accept me when I'm clearly not Victoria. Mrs. Cooper gave her an appraising look. You undervalue yourself, Miss Sinclair. Beauty fades, but strength endures. Out here, a man needs a partner more than an ornament. The train pulled into Cheyenne Station late the following afternoon. Ellie's stomach churned with nerves as she gathered her belongings. Mrs. Cooper squeezed her hand in farewell. Courage, my dear. Whatever happens, remember you acted honorably. Stepping onto the platform, Ellie was immediately assaulted by the noise and bustle of the frontier town. Freight was being loaded and unloaded, cowboys and businessmen hurried in all directions, and somewhere a saloon piano played a jaunty tune that clashed with her anxiety. She searched the crowd for a tall man in a black hat, her heart pounding. Several men matched that description, but none approached her. Had he decided not to come? Had there been another letter, a change of plans that Victoria had concealed? Miss Sinclair, the deep voice came from behind her. Ellie turned to find herself looking up, way up, into the face of a stranger. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his clean but faded shirt. Dark hair showed beneath a black Stetson, and his face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw and straight nose. A long scar ran from his right temple to his cheekbone, pale against his sun-darkened skin. But it was his eyes that caught and held her, gray as winter sky, serious and searching. This was Nathan Hayes, and he was looking at her with unmistakable confusion. Mr. Hayes? Ellie managed, her mouth suddenly dry. She'd rehearsed this moment throughout the journey, but now words deserted her. Where is Victoria? He asked, his gaze moving past her as if expecting someone else to materialize. Ellie squared her shoulders. The time for honesty had come. Mr. Hayes, I'm Eleanor Sinclair, Victoria's sister. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I'm afraid I have something to tell you right away, something you deserve to know. His expression remained guarded, but he nodded for her to continue. Victoria couldn't come. Ellie paused, choosing her words carefully. She changed her mind about the marriage. My father sent me in her place to honor our family's commitment. She rushed on before he could speak. I know this isn't what you expected, and I understand completely if you want to send me back on the next train. I have enough money for the return journey. But I couldn't let you believe Elan, not even for a day. She's not coming. It wasn't a question. Hayes's voice was flat, unreadable. Ellie shook her head. No, I'm sorry. For a long moment, Hayes studied her, his gray eyes taking in her travel-worn appearance. The simple brown dress, the practical boots, the hair escaping its pins after days on the train. Ellie fought the urge to fidget under his scrutiny. You traveled all this way alone? He finally asked. Yes. Through territory that's still half wild, where outlaws and renegades might cause trouble? The train was well guarded, Ellie replied. wondering where this line of questioning was leading. To marry a man you've never met, a man who wasn't even writing to you. It wasn't quite a question, but Ellie answered anyway. To honor my family's obligation and to tell you the truth so you could choose. Something shifted in Hayes's expression, not warmth exactly, but a slight softening around the eyes. I see. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. My wagon's this way. Ellie blinked in confusion. But don't you want to? It's nearly dark. There won't be another train for 3 days. He started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. You'll come to the ranch tonight. We can sort this out tomorrow. Too stunned to argue, Ellie hurried after him. As they crossed the station yard, she noticed several men watching their progress, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright appreciation. She pulled her shawl tighter, unused to such attention. Hayes's wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, hitched to 2 powerful draft horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat with impersonal courtesy, his hands strong but careful. As they pulled away from the station, Ellie caught her first real glimpse of Cheyenne. Despite its frontier status, it was larger and more developed than she'd expected. Main Street boasted several substantial buildings, a hotel, a bank, various shops, and no fewer than 6 saloons, their doors already spilling light and raucous laughter into the gathering dusk. They left town quickly, following a rutted road northward. Stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, more stars than Ellie had ever seen in Nebraska. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves. How old are you? Hayes asked abruptly. 24. A pause. Old for an unmarried woman. Ellie's cheeks burned at the blunt observation. Yes. Why aren't you married? The direct question stung, but Ellie appreciated his frankness. I'm not the sort men court, especially when they could court my sister instead. But you came anyway to marry a stranger. I came to tell you the truth, Ellie corrected. What happens next is your choice. Hayes made a sound that might have been approval or dismissal. They rode on in silence until lights appeared in the distance, the warm glow of windows pushing back the darkness. That's the ranch, he said. As they drew closer, Ellie could make out the shapes of buildings against the night sky. A 2-story house, larger than she'd expected, stood as the centerpiece with a broad front porch and multiple windows glowing with lamplight. Nearby stood a substantial barn, a bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. It was more established than she'd imagined, speaking of years of hard work and careful planning. Hayes pulled the wagon up near the porch and came around to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. I'll bring in your trunk, he said, nodding toward the house. It's not fancy, but it's solid. I hired a woman from town to ready things. He didn't finish, but Ellie heard the unspoken words. For Victoria. Instead, he got plain, practical Eleanor, who could probably milk his cows and mend his shirts, but would never be the ornament Victoria would have been. Hayes lit a lantern and led her inside. The front room was sparsely furnished but scrupulously clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a leather sofa and 2 armchairs arranged before it. A rocking chair sat by the window, and bookshelves lined another wall, surprising in a frontier home. Everything spoke of a man living alone, functional, orderly, with little concession to comfort or decoration. Kitchen's through there, Hayes gestured. Bedroom's upstairs. There's a guest room where you can sleep tonight. Thank you. Ellie removed her bonnet, aware of how disheveled she must look after days of travel. Mr. Hayes, I should say again, you're here, he interrupted, but you told me the truth straight off. That counts for something. He set her trunk near the stairs. Are you hungry? There's stew keeping warm. Yes, thank you. In the kitchen, Hayes ladled thick beef stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread. He poured coffee from a pot on the stove, then sat across from her at the scarred wooden table. Ellie ate carefully, acutely aware of his watchful gaze. The stew was surprisingly good, hearty and well-seasoned. Either the woman from town was an excellent cook, or Hayes himself had skills beyond what most bachelor ranchers possessed. Can you cook? He asked abruptly. Yes. Keep house, tend a garden? Yes. Handle livestock? Birth calves if needed? I was raised on a farm, Ellie replied. I've done all those things. He nodded slowly. And you can read and write, obviously. Though the letters were Victoria's, Ellie finished, unable to meet his eyes. I'm sorry for the deception. You didn't deceive me, Hayes's voice hardened. Your sister did. Your father did. Not you. They sat in silence while Ellie finished her meal. Finally, Hayes rose. I'll show you to the guest room. We'll talk more tomorrow. He carried her trunk upstairs, showing her to a small, clean room with a narrow bed and a washstand. There's water in the pitcher. Privy's out back. I rise at dawn. Mr. Hayes, Ellie said as he turned to go, what will you decide about me? He paused in the doorway, his face half in shadow. I advertised for a wife, Miss Sinclair, a partner to share this life. Your sister promised that in her letters, then broke her word. He was quiet for a moment. You came here knowing I might reject you, but you came anyway. Told me the truth anyway. His gaze met hers, direct and uncompromising. I'll decide based on who you are, not who you aren't. He closed the door, leaving Ellie alone with the flickering lamplight. She sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted from the journey and the emotional strain of their meeting. Through the window, she could see the vast Wyoming sky, stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. She thought of Victoria, probably being courted by James Parker right now, laughing in their parents' warm parlor. Thought of Nathan Hayes's gray eyes, serious and searching. He would decide tomorrow. Tonight she was here in this strange house on the edge of wilderness, having traded the familiar cage of being second best for the unknown possibilities of a new territory. As she prepared for bed, Ellie noticed something she'd missed earlier, a movement at the window of the room across the yard, a face peering out from the darkness, watching the main house, a woman's face, pale in the moonlight, with an expression Ellie couldn't quite decipher. Then the face disappeared, the curtain falling back into place, leaving Ellie to wonder if she'd imagined it, or if Nathan Hayes had failed to mention that she wasn't the only woman at Whispering Pines Ranch. I've written part 1 of Love Beyond Tempests based on your upgraded outline. The narrative follows Ellie Sinclair as she journeys from her family farm in Nebraska to Wyoming to replace her sister as Nathan Hayes' mail-order bride. Dawn broke over Whispering Pines Ranch in a wash of gold and rose. Eleanor woke to unfamiliar birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality rushed back. Wyoming, Nathan Hayes, the journey that had brought her hundreds of miles from home to a stranger's door. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine of pinning up her hair, though she found herself taking extra care, smoothing the wayward strands that always escaped at her temples. The house was quiet as she descended the stairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Hayes already at work in the barn, his tall figure moving with economical grace among the horses. Beside him stood a slender young man, the ranch hand, she presumed. Without thinking, Ellie began to make breakfast. By the time heavy footsteps sounded on the porch, she had biscuits browning in the oven, bacon sizzling in the pan, and coffee brewing on the stove. Hayes stopped short in the doorway, taking in the scene with evident surprise. You didn't have to. I'm used to being useful, Ellie said simply, not turning from the stove. Sit, it's almost ready. After a moment's hesitation, Hayes hung his hat on a peg and sat at the table, watching as she moved efficiently around his kitchen. When she set a plate before him, golden biscuits, crisp bacon, eggs fried perfectly, something flickered in his gray eyes. This is good, he said after the first bite. It's just breakfast, Ellie shrugged, though inwardly pleased. Been a long time since anyone cooked for me like this. He paused. Except Mrs. Hollister from town, and she charges by the hour. They ate in companionable silence. Ellie found herself studying him covertly, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the careful way he handled his fork and knife, the small scars on his knuckles. He was handsome in a severe way, though lines of hardship marked his face. I need to speak plain with you, Miss Sinclair, Hayes said finally, pushing back from the table. Ellie's stomach tightened, but she met his gaze steadily. I appreciate directness. I need a wife, not for decoration or social calls. There's precious little society out here anyway. His expression was serious. I need a partner, someone who can handle the work, the isolation, the hard seasons, Someone who won't fold up and blow away when winter winds hit or summer drought burns everything brown. I understand, Ellie said quietly. Do you? His eyes searched hers. The nearest neighbor is Sofia Rivera, 5 miles east. Town's a day's ride. In winter, we might be cut off for weeks. There's no fancy goods, no socials every week, no family visiting for Sunday dinner. Mr. Hayes, Ellie said, holding his gaze, I've spent my life working. I know isolation, being in a crowded room and still being alone because no one sees you past your prettier sister. I can work your garden, tend your house, help with stock if needed. I'm not afraid of hard seasons. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Come with me. He led her outside into the crisp morning air. The ranch spread before them, bathed in early light. To the east, a small creek wound through green pastures where cattle grazed. To the west rose the foothills of a mountain range, their peaks already crowned with snow, though it was only April. Fields stretched north and south, ready for planting. 200 acres, Hayes said, built it up from nothing after the war. Every fence post, every building placed with these hands. He flexed his scarred fingers unconsciously. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. He paused. Ours if you decide to keep me, Ellie finished for him. If we decide to suit each other, he corrected. I'm not an easy man, Miss Sinclair. The war left its marks. I have moods, dark days. I work from dawn till dusk. I don't talk much. I'm not an easy woman, Ellie replied. I speak my mind. I'm plain as a fence post. I can't sing or play piano or do fancy needlework. I'll never be the ornament Victoria would have been. I don't need an ornament, his voice roughened. I need someone real. The sound of an approaching horse interrupted them. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Hayes's hand moved instinctively to his hip, though Ellie noticed he wore no gun, an unusual choice for a frontier rancher. The rider resolved into the young man she'd glimpsed earlier, perhaps 20, with sandy hair and an open face. He pulled up in a cloud of dust, touching his hat to Ellie. Morning, Nathan, he called cheerfully. This the new Mrs. Hayes? Miss Sinclair, Hayes corrected. Eleanor, this is Michael Turner. He helps out when I need an extra hand. Pleased to meet you, miss. Michael's smile widened, his appreciation obvious. Welcome to Wyoming territory. Nathan here's a lucky man. Ellie felt heat rise in her cheeks. It had been years since any man looked at her with such open admiration. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Just Michael, please. Everyone calls me Michael. He turned to Hayes. Came to tell you that fence in the north pasture's down again. Looks like someone cut it deliberate this time. Hayes's jaw tightened. Third time this month. Want me to ride out with you? We'd best both go, Michael agreed. Whoever's doing it is getting bolder. Hayes glanced at Ellie. I'll be back by midday. I'll be here, she said simply. She watched them ride off, noting how confidently Hayes sat his horse, back straight, moving as one with the animal. Michael kept turning to look back at her until Hayes said something that made the younger man face forward with a laugh. Left alone, Ellie turned to survey her temporary domain. If Hayes decided to send her back, at least she could leave things better than she found them. She started with the house, opening windows to air out the rooms. The main room needed little, just dust removed and the furniture rearranged to better catch the morning light. She found Hayes' bedroom upstairs, as Spartan as a monk's cell. The bed was made with military precision. A Bible on the nightstand, the only personal touch. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered a Union uniform carefully folded, and beneath it, letters tied with string. Ellie didn't read them. They weren't hers to read, but she noticed they were addressed to Sergeant Nathan Hayes, and the newest was dated 1865. By mid-morning, Ellie had bread rising, beans soaking for supper, and had swept the floors downstairs. She was in the garden assessing what could be salvaged from Hayes's somewhat neglected vegetable patch when a soft noise made her turn. A girl stood watching her from the shadow of an oak tree. No, Ellie realized, not a girl, but a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, with hair as dark as Hayes's and the same gray eyes. She wore a simple dress of brown homespun and clutched a small slate in one hand. Hello, Ellie said, straightening. You must be Mr. Hayes's sister. The young woman didn't respond verbally. Instead, she raised the slate and wrote quickly in chalk. Abigail Hayes, who are you? Ellie hesitated, surprised by the method of communication. I'm Eleanor Sinclair. Well, it's complicated. Another bride, Abigail wrote, her expression skeptical. Sort of. Your brother is deciding whether to send me back or keep me. The blunt words sounded harsh in the spring air, but Abigail nodded as if they made perfect sense. He won't send you back, she wrote. You cook. Last one couldn't even make coffee. Last one? Ellie echoed. Abigail's chalk moved swiftly. Third this year. Others didn't stay past first night. The revelation stunned Ellie. Hayes hadn't mentioned previous brides, failed or otherwise. Apparently Victoria hadn't been his first choice, merely his latest attempt. Don't tell him I told you, Abigail added. He gets growly. Despite herself, Ellie smiled at the description. I won't say a word. Would you like to help me with the garden? I'm trying to figure out what can be saved. Abigail hesitated, then nodded, setting her slate aside to kneel in the dirt beside Ellie. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as they weeded around struggling tomato plants and salvaged what remained of an herb patch. As they worked, Ellie noticed Abigail occasionally making gestures, fingers fluttering, hands forming shapes. Sign language, she realized. The girl wasn't merely quiet, she was mute. Ellie tried a simple question. Have you always lived here with your brother? Abigail's hands stilled. She retrieved her slate. Since parents died. 1862. I'm sorry, Ellie said softly. War took father. Fever took mother. Nathan came home and brought me west. The simple sentences spoke volumes about the bond between the siblings. Hayes had not merely sought his own fresh start after the war, he'd created a home for his sister as well. Why did you come? Abigail wrote. Ellie considered her answer carefully. To save my family's farm, and because I wanted to be honest with your brother about why my sister couldn't come. Will you stay if he asks? I don't know, Ellie admitted. It depends on whether we suit each other, I suppose. Abigail studied her for a long moment, then wrote, I hope you stay. Garden needs help. So does Nathan. Before Ellie could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced the men's return. Abigail immediately withdrew, disappearing around the side of the house with a swift wave. Hayes dismounted with fluid grace, his expression grim. Found where they cut the fence, lost 3 calves to rustlers. I'm sorry, Ellie said, genuinely dismayed. Even on a prosperous ranch, the loss of livestock was a serious matter. Hayes glanced at the garden, noticing the neat piles of weeds in the newly arranged beds. You've been busy. Just getting my bearings, Ellie replied. Your sister helped. His eyebrows rose. Abby spoke to you? Not exactly. We communicated. Ellie hesitated, then asked, has she always been unable to speak? A shadow crossed Hayes' face. No, she could talk fine until she was 12. Then our parents died and he trailed off. Shock, the doctor said. Might be temporary. That was 8 years ago. The pain in his voice was palpable. Ellie understood then that Abigail's muteness was another burden Hayes carried, another responsibility, another reminder of loss. I met some of your neighbors this morning, she said, changing the subject. A woman came by from the next ranch. Sophia Rivera? Sophia rode over? Hayes sounded surprised. She rarely leaves her place. She seemed friendly, invited me to visit. Ellie brushed dirt from her skirt. Is there something I should know? Hayes' expression closed. Sophia's good people. Her husband was killed 2 years back, mining accident. She runs the ranch herself with her brother and son. He paused. Some in town don't approve of her. Mexican woman owning land, running things her own way. But you approve, Ellie observed. I mind my business. She minds hers. We help each other when needed. He gestured toward the house. I'll wash up. Need to ride into town this afternoon. Speak to the sheriff about these fence cuttings. Would you like me to come along? Ellie asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Hayes considered her for a moment, then nodded. Might as well. You'll need to know your way around town if you're staying. The if hung between them, a reminder that nothing was yet decided. As Hayes disappeared into the house, Michael approached Ellie with a friendly smile. You've made an impression, he said quietly. I've only been here a day, Ellie demurred. Long enough. Nathan doesn't usually take new people to town. Doesn't trust easily. Michael glanced toward the house. Can't blame him after what happened in the war. Ellie's curiosity flared. What did happen? Michael looked surprised. You don't know? I thought. He shook his head. Never mind, not my story to tell. Before Ellie could press further, Hayes emerged from the house, and Michael quickly made himself scarce. The ride to town was long but pleasant. Spring had painted the Wyoming landscape in vibrant greens and yellows, with wildflowers speckling the prairie like dropped jewels. Ellie found herself relaxing in Hayes's company, despite his continued reticence. Tell me about your family, he said suddenly, breaking a lengthy silence. Ellie described her parents, her father's war injury, her mother's lingering homesickness for Boston. She spoke of the farm, its challenges and rewards. She mentioned Victoria's beauty and charm without bitterness, simply stating facts. And you were the workhorse, Hayes observed. I was useful, Ellie corrected. That has its own value. Hayes studied her with newfound interest. Most women would resent such a role. I resented being invisible, Ellie admitted, not the work itself. As they approached Cheyenne, the traffic on the road increased. Cowboys driving small herds, freight wagons laden with supplies, lone riders on various errands. Hayes guided their wagon through the bustle with practiced ease. Cheyenne in daylight revealed itself as a town in transition, part rough frontier outpost, part aspiring city. Main Street boasted a surprising number of substantial buildings alongside the expected saloons and boarding houses. Women in fashionable dresses mingled with cowboys and laborers. The Eastern Pacific Railroad had brought civilization to Wyoming's doorstep, though the wilderness still pressed close at the town's edges. Hayes tied the wagon in front of the sheriff's office. Wait here, he instructed. I won't be long. Left alone, Ellie observed the town's activities with interest. Directly across the street stood the Cattlemen's Bank, its stone facade proclaiming permanence and prosperity. A steady stream of well-dressed men entered and exited its polished doors. One such man emerged, pausing on the top step to light a cigar. Something about his posture, the entitled tilt of his head, the leisurely way he surveyed the street, reminded Ellie sharply of James Parker. As if summoned by the comparison, the man's gaze fell on her, lingering with calculated interest. Ellie looked away, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. When she glanced back, the man was crossing the street directly toward her. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked dark hair. Robert Chambers at your service. I don't believe we've met. Eleanor Sinclair, Ellie replied, keeping her tone polite but reserved. New to Cheyenne? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Allow me to welcome you to our fine community. Are you visiting family? Before Ellie could respond, Hayes emerged from the sheriff's office. His step faltered momentarily when he spotted Chambers, his expression hardening. Hayes, Chambers acknowledged coolly. I was just making the acquaintance of Miss Sinclair here. Chambers, Hayes's voice could have frozen water. Miss Sinclair is with me. So I see. Chambers' gaze moved between them, calculating. Well, Miss Sinclair, it's been a pleasure. I do hope we'll meet again under more congenial circumstances. He replaced his hat with a flourish and continued down the street. Hayes watched him go, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. Who was that? Ellie asked as Hayes helped her back into the wagon. No one worth knowing, he replied flatly. They completed their errands in strained silence, purchasing supplies at the general store, arranging for mail delivery, stopping briefly at the church to speak with the minister. Throughout, Ellie noticed how the townspeople reacted to Hayes. Some greeted him warmly, others with cool reserve, and a few openly turned away. Hayes seemed to notice but not care, conducting his business with stoic efficiency. At the general store, Ellie overheard two women whispering as they selected fabric. Hayes's new bride, third one this year, poor thing. She'll leave like the others once she learns what he did. Coward on the battlefield, tyrant at home, if you ask me. Ellie's cheeks burned with indignation on Hayes's behalf, though she remained silent. Later, as they loaded supplies into the wagon, she ventured a question. The townspeople seem divided about you. Hayes secured a sack of flour with a rope. People believe what they want to believe. About what happened during the war, Ellie pressed gently, his movements stilled. Who told you? I found a newspaper clipping among my sister's things, Ellie admitted. It mentioned a court-martial. Hayes was quiet for so long that Ellie thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Some stories aren't worth telling, Miss Sinclair. And some secrets fester when kept too long," she countered. His gray eyes met hers, searching. "You're direct." "You said you wanted someone real," she reminded him. "Real people ask questions when they care." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant appreciation. "Ask me again someday," he said finally. "Not here. Not today." Ellie nodded, accepting the boundary. Fair enough. As they prepared to leave town, a well-dressed couple approached their wagon. The woman, middle-aged with steel gray hair and patrician features, eyed Ellie with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Hayes," she said with brittle politeness, "won't you introduce us to your companion?" Hayes's expression remained neutral. "Reverend Edwards, Mrs. Edwards, this is Miss Eleanor Sinclair. Miss Sinclair, Reverend Edwards is our town's minister." "Another one, Mr. Hayes?" Mrs. Edwards's tone dripped with disapproval. "I do hope you are proceeding with more caution this time." Beside her, Reverend Edwards cleared his throat. "What my wife means, Miss Sinclair, is that we're concerned about these arrangements. Marriage is a sacred institution, not a business transaction." "I appreciate your concern," Ellie replied evenly. "But Mr. Hayes and I are still determining if we suit each other. No vows have been exchanged." "Very sensible," Reverend Edwards nodded. "Should you decide to proceed, I trust you'll seek proper Christian counsel first." "Of course." Hayes's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "Good day to you both." As they drove away, Ellie couldn't help asking, "How many brides have there been before me?" Hayes's hands tightened on the reins. "Abby told you." "She mentioned there had been others who didn't stay," Ellie admitted. He sighed. "Two. Both answered my advertisement. Both took one look at the ranch and at me and decided frontier life wasn't what they'd imagined. Neither lasted past breakfast." "And you think I might do the same," Ellie realized. "The thought crossed my mind," Hayes acknowledged, "but you're different." He glanced at her. "You didn't flinch when Mrs. Edwards looked at you like something that crawled out of a snake hole. You jumped right into working the garden. You talk to Abby like she's a person, not a burden." They were the most words he'd strung together since her arrival, and Ellie felt oddly touched by the observation. "I like your sister," she said simply, "and I'm used to disapproving looks." The remainder of the journey passed in comfortable silence. As the ranch came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, Ellie found herself hoping she might be allowed to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because something about Whispering Pines, something about Nathan Hayes, called to her in a way she couldn't yet articulate. The days that followed fell into a natural rhythm. Ellie rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings tending the house and garden. Afternoons were devoted to learning the ranch's operations, the location of pastures, the habits of the livestock, the seasonal cycles that govern frontier life. Hayes worked from sunup to sundown, repairing fences, tending cattle, preparing fields for planting. He spoke little but watched Ellie constantly, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Each evening they ate supper together, their conversation gradually expanding beyond the day's tasks to include cautious, personal exchanges. Ellie learned that Hayes had been a schoolteacher before the war, that he'd homesteaded this land in 18s, that he preferred coffee black and disliked turnips with an almost childish intensity. He, in turn, discovered her fondness for reading, her skill with numbers, her ability to predict weather changes from the behavior of birds and livestock. Abigail gradually emerged from her shyness, spending more time with Ellie. She showed Ellie her small collection of books, her attempts at sketching, her favorite hiding places around the ranch. Ellie began to learn rudimentary sign language, her fingers clumsily mimicking Abigail's graceful gestures. A week passed, then another. The question of Ellie's staying or leaving remained unaddressed, though Hayes made no move to send her away. Instead, he began including her in decisions about the ranch. Which fields to plant first, whether to purchase additional livestock, how to address the continuing problem of cut fences and missing cattle. On her 18th day at Whispering Pines, Ellie found herself alone on the front porch after supper. The evening stretched peaceful and quiet around her. the last light fading from the western sky, stars emerging one by one in the deepening blue. Hayes emerged from the house, a steaming cup in each hand. He offered one to Ellie, then settled into the chair beside her. The coffee was laced with honey, the way she preferred it. They sat in companionable silence, watching night claim the land. A coyote called from a distant ridge, its lonesome cry echoing across the valley. Closer, the soft nickering of horses in the barn provided a counterpoint to the evening chorus of crickets and frogs. "I couldn't sleep after we came home from the war," Hayes said suddenly. "For months, I just sit out here and watch the stars, listening for danger that wasn't there anymore." Ellie remained quiet, sensing he needed to speak without interruption. "When we shipped out in '61, I thought I knew what war was. My father fought the Mexicans in '46. Came home with stories that sounded almost like adventures." His voice turned bitter. "Nothing prepared me for what we found. The noise, the smell. Men I'd known my whole life blown to pieces right in front of me." He stared into the darkness, seeing battlefields Ellie could only imagine. "I was a sergeant by '64, had men looking to me to keep them alive, following orders that sometimes didn't make sense. And then, he trailed off, his knuckles white around his coffee cup. "Sharpsburg," Ellie prompted gently. "The newspaper mentioned it." Hayes nodded once. "My unit was ordered to clear a farmhouse. Intelligence said it was an enemy position. But when we got there," he drew a ragged breath, "it was just a family. A man, his wife, 3 children. Scared, hungry. No soldiers." "What happened?" Ellie asked when he fell silent. "My commanding officer ordered us to kill them anyway. Said they were probably spies. Said we couldn't leave witnesses." Hayes's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I refused, ordered my men to stand down. The major called me a coward, took over command. I tried to stop him, but..." He didn't need to finish. Ellie could imagine the scene all too vividly. "Afterward, I was court-martialed. Insubordination, dereliction of duty. The official report said my cowardice cost American lives. We lost 2 men in a skirmish the next day, and somehow that became my fault." He gave a humorless laugh. "Better to blame one soldier than admit we murdered innocent civilians." "You weren't a coward," Ellie said fiercely. "You were the only one brave enough to stand against injustice." Hayes looked at her, surprise evident in his face. "Most people don't see it that way." "Most people weren't there," Ellie countered, "and most people find it easier to believe a simple lie than a complicated truth." They fell silent again, the weight of his confession settling between them. Ellie understood now why he lived so isolated, why the townspeople treated him with such mixed reactions. The story of his cowardice had followed him west, distorted by time and telling into something ugly and untrue. "Thank you," she said after a while. "For what?" "For telling me, for trusting me with the truth." Hayes nodded once, then rose to his feet. "It's getting late. You should rest." But as he turned to go, Ellie caught his hand. His skin was warm and rough against hers, the calluses of a working man. "Nathan," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "You did the right thing, no matter what anyone says." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening of the hard lines that normally defined his features. He squeezed her hand briefly before releasing it. "Good night, Eleanor." And as she watched him disappear into the house, Ellie realized 2 things simultaneously. She wanted to stay at Whispering Pines Ranch, and she was in danger of losing her heart to Nathan Hayes. The next morning, Ellie woke to the sound of raised voices. She dressed hurriedly and descended the stairs to find Nathan and Robert Chambers facing each other in the front room, tension crackling between them. "I've told you before, Chambers, I'm not selling," Nathan was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Be reasonable, Hayes. The railroad's coming through whether you like it or not. Sell now and you'll get a fair price. Wait and..." Chambers spread his hands expressively. "Well, unfortunate accidents seem to plague holdouts." "Is that a threat?" Nathan took a step forward. Chambers smiled thinly. "Merely an observation. Cut fences, missing cattle. Terrible business, isn't it? Makes a man wonder what might happen next." "Get off my land," Nathan said quietly, too quietly. Chambers turned to leave, then noticed Ellie standing in the doorway. "Ah, Miss Sinclair, a pleasure to see you again." His gaze moved between her and Nathan, calculating him. Has Hayes told you what you've gotten yourself into? This ranch won't exist in 6 months. The railroad needs this land, and what the railroad needs, it takes. Then the railroad needs better representatives, Ellie replied coolly. Good day, Mr. Chambers. Chambers' smile turned ugly. Pretty and spirited. You do have a type, don't you, Hayes? Let's hope this one doesn't run screaming when she learns the whole truth. After he'd gone, Ellie turned to Nathan, who stood rigid with anger. What did he mean about the whole truth? Nothing. Nathan moved to the window, watching to ensure Chambers left. He's trying to create discord. It's what he does. He seems to know you, Ellie observed. Nathan's jaw tightened. We served together. He was under my command at Sharpsburg. Understanding dawned. He was there when you refused to kill that family. He was the one who carried out the order after I was removed, Nathan said flatly. Shot the father himself, then watched while the others... He stopped, unable to continue. And now he works for the railroad, Ellie said, disgusted. Fitting, isn't it? From murdering civilians to stealing land. Nathan turned from the window. He's been trying to buy the ranch for months. When I refused, these accidents began happening. That's why you were suspicious when Michael reported the cut fence, Ellie realized. Nathan nodded grimly. Michael worked for the railroad when he first came here. I hired him away when I realized Chambers was using him to spy on me. Can you trust him now? I believe so. He's young, but he has a conscience. Once he understood what Chambers was really doing, he switched loyalties. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. I should have told you about the railroad before now. If you want to leave, I don't, Ellie interrupted. I'm not afraid of Robert Chambers or his threats. Nathan studied her, something like wonder in his eyes. You really aren't, are you? I grew up watching my father fight the bank year after year, Ellie replied. I know bullies when I see them, and I know they only win when good people back down. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. You're something else, Eleanor Sinclair. The moment was broken by Michael's arrival, his expression grave. Nathan, you'd better come quick. Sophia's place. There's trouble. They rode hard toward the Rivera Ranch, Nathan, Michael, and Ellie, pushing their horses to a gallop. Smoke rose in a dark column from beyond the next ridge. Not the controlled smoke of a cooking fire, but the black billows of destruction. As they crested the hill, Ellie gasped. The small house that formed the center of Sophia Rivera's ranch was ablaze, flames leaping from the roof and windows. In the yard, Sophia and a teenage boy, her son Ellie presumed, frantically worked to keep the fire from spreading to nearby outbuildings. Nathan spurred his horse down the slope, shouting orders as they approached. Michael, get the livestock clear. Eleanor, help Sophia with those buckets. I'll try to save what I can from inside. The next hour passed in a blur of heat, smoke, and desperate action. Ellie formed a bucket brigade with Sophia and her son, drawing water from the well to douse the edges of the fire. Michael led terrified horses and cattle to safety, while Nathan, handkerchief tied over his face, darted into the burning building again and again to salvage what he could. Despite their efforts, the house was a total loss. By mid-afternoon, all that remained was a smoldering shell, the stone chimney standing like a blackened finger against the sky. Sophia Rivera sat on an overturned barrel, her dark eyes hollow with shock. She was a handsome woman in her late 30s, with lustrous black hair streaked prematurely with silver, and the dignified bearing of someone accustomed to adversity. Gracias, she said quietly as Ellie brought her water. You and Nathan are good neighbors. What happened? Ellie asked, sitting beside her. I was in town, getting supplies. Miguel, she nodded toward her son, who sat nearby, his face streaked with soot, was checking the far pasture. By the time we saw the smoke, she spread her hands in a gesture of helplessness. It wasn't an accident, Miguel said bitterly. I saw 3 riders leaving as I came back. One wore a gray suit and black hat. Nathan, who had been speaking with Michael, turned at this. Chambers, he said grimly. Sophia nodded. He came yesterday offering to buy the ranch. When I refused, he became unpleasant. The same thing that's been happening to us, Nathan told her. Cut fences, missing cattle. But this, Ellie gestured at the ruins. This is criminal. And who would believe us? Sophia asked wearily. A Mexican woman, a cowardly veteran, and a boy against a respected businessman? The sheriff would laugh. What will you do? Ellie asked. Sophia straightened her shoulders. Rebuild. What else? This is my home, my son's birthright. I will not be driven away. You can stay with us until you have shelter again, Nathan offered. Sophia hesitated, then nodded gratefully. Just until we can build something temporary. Miguel and I don't want to impose. What about your brother? Nathan asked. Will he join us? Carlos is in Denver selling cattle. He won't return for a week. Sophia's expression clouded. Perhaps it's better this way. He has a quick temper. If he knew Chambers was behind this. The ride back to Whispering Pines was subdued. Miguel rode with Michael, while Sophia shared Nathan's horse. Ellie found herself watching Nathan, the careful way he supported Sophia, the gentle reassurance he offered. This man, branded a coward, possessed a quiet courage that continually revealed itself in moments of crisis. That evening, after Sophia and Miguel were settled in the spare bedroom and Abigail's room respectively, Ellie found herself alone with Nathan in the kitchen. They worked together to prepare a simple meal, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of people who had known each other much longer than 3 weeks. You think Chambers will come after us next? Ellie said as she sliced bread. Nathan nodded. He's escalating. First it was just pressure, then minor vandalism. Now arson. He glanced toward the stairs. I'm worried about Abby, and you. I can take care of myself, Ellie reminded him. I know you can, Nathan's voice softened. That's not the point. Then what is? He set down the plate he was holding and turned to face her fully. The point is, I don't want you hurt because of me, because of my stubborn refusal to sell. It's your land, Ellie said firmly. You built this place from nothing. You have every right to keep it. Even if it puts everyone He stopped, recalibrated. Even if it puts everyone here in danger? Ellie caught the slip, the word he hadn't said, and her heart quickened. We face the danger together, she said quietly. That's what partners do. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken in his gray eyes. Then, with deliberate care, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. Eleanor, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by a crash from outside, followed by the frantic barking of the ranch dogs. Nathan was instantly alert, moving to the window. Stay here, he ordered, reaching for his coat. Not a chance, Ellie replied, already heading for the door. Outside, they found Michael struggling with a stranger, a man in expensive Eastern clothes, his face obscured in the darkness. As Nathan approached, Michael managed to pin the intruder against the barn wall. Look who I caught snooping drowned, Michael panted, yanking the man's head back by his hair. The stranger's face came into the lantern light, and Ellie gasped in shock. James Parker? The man's eyes widened in recognition. Eleanor Sinclair? What the devil are you doing here? Nathan looked between them, confusion evident. You know this man? He's from Nebraska, Ellie explained, stunned by the coincidence. He was courting my sister. Parker straightened his disheveled clothing, attempting to regain his dignity. I wasn't courting anyone. I was conducting business with your father. Business? Ellie's eyes narrowed. Is that what you call trying to steal our farm? Such melodrama, Parker sneered. I was offering a fair deal. Not my fault your father was too stubborn to see reason. What are you doing here? Nathan demanded. Parker's expression turned calculating. Representing mutual interests. My employer believes this land would be better utilized as part of the Eastern Pacific expansion. Your employer? Ellie echoed. The railroad? Of course. Parker smiled thinly. Did you think I'd come all this way for Victoria? Pretty as she is, there are easier ways to acquire a wife. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Ellie. You never wanted Victoria. You wanted our farm because the railroad is coming through. Smart girl, Parker nodded. The Sinclair property sits at a crucial junction. We needed it for a depot. When your father refused to sell, we had to get creative. By pretending to court Victoria, Ellie said, disgust evident in her voice, making her think you loved her. Parker shrugged. Business requires certain sacrifices. Speaking of which, he turned to Nathan, my colleague Mr. Chambers sends his regards. He thought perhaps seeing your home burn like Mrs. Rivera's might convince you to reconsider his offer. Nathan's face hardened. Get off my property before I forget I'm a civilized man. I'm afraid I can't leave just yet, Parker replied smoothly. You see, I've come with a proposition. Sell now, today, and you'll receive fair market value for your land. Rippy, and he gestured vaguely toward the house. Well, accidents happen. You're threatening to burn us out, just like you did to Sophia, Ellie said, outrage coloring her voice. Business, Parker repeated. Nothing personal. Nathan took a menacing step forward. It became personal when you targeted my family. Now get out. Your family? Parker laughed. You mean that mute girl and this mail-order bride who couldn't even get a husband back home? Hardly worth protecting, I'd say. The words had barely left his mouth when Nathan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. Parker lay there, stunned, blood trickling from his split lip. Michael, Nathan said quietly, escort Mr. Parker to the property line. If he resists, you have my permission to get creative. As Michael dragged the still dazed Parker away, Ellie turned to Nathan. They won't stop, will they? No, Nathan sighed, flexing his bruised knuckles. They won't. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ellie slipped downstairs for a glass of water. She found Nathan at the kitchen table, a lamp burning low beside him, papers spread before him. What are you doing? She asked softly. He looked up, shadows deepening the lines on his face, looking for a way out, checking finances, seeing if there's legal recourse. Ellie sat across from him, noticing the stack of bank drafts, the property deed, the calculations scribbled in Nathan's precise handwriting. And I'm losing, he admitted with quiet bitterness. The ranch is mortgaged to the bank in Cheyenne, Chambers Bank. They can call in the loan at any time. If they do, I can't pay. That's why he's so confident, Ellie realized. He doesn't actually need you to sell. He can just take the land when you default. Nathan nodded grimly. Exactly. Then we fight, Ellie said firmly. Not just you, all of us, together. Eleanor, Nathan's voice softened. This isn't your battle. Isn't it? She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. James Parker came here straight from trying to steal my family's farm. He used my sister, lied to my father, all for the railroad. This is very much my battle. Nathan's hand turned to capture hers. You're extraordinary, you know that? Most women would be halfway back to Nebraska by now. I'm not most women, Ellie reminded him, and I don't run from bullies. In the soft lamplight, she saw something change in Nathan's expression. A decision made, a barrier lowered. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. No, he agreed quietly. You don't. Then with infinite gentleness, he cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her. It was a careful kiss, tentative and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Ellie leaned into it, her hands coming to rest on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palm. When they separated, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because of any obligation. Stay because you want to. I want to, Ellie answered without hesitation. I want to stay, Nathan. With you. With Abby. Here. The smile that transformed his face was worth every mile of the journey from Nebraska, every moment of uncertainty. In that smile, Ellie saw the man he might have been before war, and hardship carved their marks into his soul, and the man he might become again, with time and love to heal those wounds. Then you'll marry me, he asked? Be my wife, my partner in all things? Yes, Ellie said simply. I will. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, their futures intertwining like the roots of trees growing side by side, drawing strength from the same soil. Outside, the Wyoming night wrapped around Whispering Pines Ranch like a protective blanket, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Sinclair felt truly seen. Not as a workhorse, not as Victoria's plain sister, but as herself, and for the first time, that self seemed more than enough. The storm arrived 3 days later, turning the world into a chaos of wind and water, threatening everything they had just begun to build together. The sky turned the color of bruised plums as the storm clouds gathered over Whispering Pines Ranch. Wind whipped through the cottonwoods, bending them like supplicants before an angry god. In the pastures, cattle huddled together, sensing the coming fury. Eleanor watched from the porch as Nathan and Michael worked frantically to secure the last of the livestock. Sophia and her son Miguel had ridden to check their own property at first light, despite Nathan's warnings about the approaching storm. Nathan thinks it will be bad, Abigail wrote on her slate, coming to stand beside Ellie. I think he's right, Ellie replied, studying the darkening horizon. I've never seen clouds that color before. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed seconds later by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The air felt heavy, electric with anticipation. We should bring in more water, Ellie decided, and check the storm cellar, just in case. Together they filled every available container from the pump, then inspected the small underground shelter behind the house. It was well stocked with lanterns, blankets, and preserved food. Nathan had clearly prepared for emergencies. By the time the men returned, raindrops as big as silver dollars were beginning to fall, striking the dry earth with audible impacts. Nathan's face was grim as he strode toward the house, his clothing already soaked. Creek's rising fast, he reported, faster than I've ever seen. We've moved the herd to higher ground, but there are still calves in the lower pasture. Shouldn't we go after them? Ellie asked. Nathan shook his head. Too dangerous now. We'd never reach them before the water does. But even as he spoke, they heard the distant, plaintive bawling of a calf in distress. Nathan stiffened, his expression torn. Ellie knew what he was thinking. Those calves represented not just lives, but livelihood. Each loss was a blow they could ill afford, especially with the bank's deadline looming. I'll go, Michael volunteered, already turning back toward the barn. No, Nathan's voice was firm. You stay with Abby. I'll check the creek. If any calves are close enough to the bank, I might be able to reach them. Let me come with you, Ellie said, reaching for her coat. Nathan hesitated, clearly wanting to refuse, but something in her expression must have told him argument was futile. Stay close, he finally agreed. If I say run, you run. No questions. They rode toward the creek, the rain now falling in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses around the sections of trail that had already turned to sucking mud. The wind drove the rain horizontally, stinging Ellie's face like needles of ice. When they reached the creek, Ellie gasped in shock. The normally placid stream had transformed into a roaring torrent, its banks already overflowing, muddy water rushing with terrifying speed toward the lower pastures. There, Nathan pointed through the rain. On the opposite bank, stranded on a small rise of land, stood 3 calves, water already swirling around their legs. Their frightened bawling carried faintly over the storm's roar. How do we reach them? Ellie shouted. Nathan surveyed the scene with an experienced eye. We don't. That ground will be underwater in minutes. We'd never make it across and back. Even as he spoke, one of the calves lost its footing and was swept into the current, its panicked cries cutting off abruptly as the water claimed it. Ellie felt Nathan tense beside her, his hand tightening on her arm. We have to try, she insisted. It's too dangerous. Those calves are your future, Ellie argued. Our future. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes at the word our. Acknowledgement of the commitment they'd made just days ago. He studied the creek again, calculating, then nodded once. There's a fallen log downstream, he decided. Might give us a way across, but we stay together. No heroics. They left the horses secured on high ground and made their way along the bank. The fallen tree Nathan had mentioned stretched most of the way across the swollen creek, its upper branches still catching against the far bank. It didn't look stable, but it was their only chance. I'll go first, Nathan said, already moving onto the log. Test my weight before you follow. Ellie waited anxiously as he inched his way across, the log shifting ominously under his weight. Water rushed just inches below, ready to sweep away anything that fell into its grasp. When Nathan reached the far bank, he turned and gestured for Ellie to follow. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the log. It felt slick and unstable beneath her boots, and she crouched low, using her hands for balance. The roar of the water seemed to fill her entire world, drowning out everything except the thundering of her own heart. Halfway across, the log shifted suddenly. Ellie froze, terror clutching at her throat. Behind her, she heard a splintering crack as the tree's roots tore free of the saturated earth. The log began to rotate, threatening to roll her into the churning water below. "Jump!" Nathan shouted from the bank. "Now, Eleanor!" Instinct took over. Ellie launched herself forward, arms outstretched toward Nathan's waiting hands. For one heart-stopping moment, she was suspended over the raging creek. Then Nathan caught her wrists, his grip iron-strong, and hauled her to safety just as the log was swept away in the torrent. "That was too close," he gasped, holding her against him. Despite the rain plastering his hair to his forehead and running in rivulets down his face, Ellie could see the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "We made it," she assured him. "Now let's get those calves." The remaining two calves huddled together on their shrinking island, water now reaching their bellies. To reach them, Nathan and Ellie would have to wade through knee-deep water that was rising by the minute. "I'll carry them," Nathan decided. "You stay on higher ground." But as they approached, the calves panicked, one bolting straight into the creek where the current immediately caught it. Without hesitation, Nathan plunged in after it. "Nathan!" Ellie cried, watching in horror as both man and beast were swept downstream. She ran along the bank, keeping pace with Nathan's struggle. He had managed to grab the calf, one arm locked around its neck, but the current was too strong. Both were being pulled inexorably toward the deeper channel where the creek curved around a bend. Ellie spotted a half-submerged log where the creek narrowed and the water ran fastest. If Nathan was swept past that point, she knew he wouldn't survive. Without stopping to consider the danger, she waded in, grabbing a protruding root for stability. "Nathan!" she called again. "Here, grab my hand." He saw her, his eyes widening in alarm. "Get back!" he shouted, still clutching the terrified calf. Instead, Ellie pushed deeper, the water now at her ribs, her dress billowing around her like a strange sea creature. "Together," she called. "We'll do it together." For a heartbeat, Nathan stared at her, soaked, mud-streaked, stubborn Eleanor Sinclair, who had come into his life less than a month ago. A woman who had every reason to retreat to safety, yet had plunged into danger without hesitation. Something flashed in his eyes then, recognition, perhaps, or understanding, and he nodded once. Working in unison, they maneuvered the frightened calf toward the bank. The animal kicked and struggled, its terror making the rescue all the more perilous. Just as they neared safety, the log Nathan had been using for support shifted. The current caught him off balance, and Ellie watched in horror as he went under. Her hands shot out instinctively, fingers tangling in the rough fabric of his shirt. She pulled with strength born of desperation, but the current was winning. Just when her grip began to fail, another pair of hands reached past her. Michael, who had disobeyed orders and followed them, had made it down the bank. Together, they dragged Nathan to shallower water. All three collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping for breath, while the rescued calf scrambled away on wobbling legs. "Damn fool thing to do," Nathan coughed, water streaming from his dark hair. Ellie couldn't tell if he meant his actions or hers. "Yes," she agreed, her fingers still clutching his soaked shirt. It was. As their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of the lengths they would go for each other. A shared, stubborn determination that had just saved both their lives. "Not all sisters are alike, are they?" Nathan said quietly, echoing his words from the beginning of their journey. The rescued calf bawled pitifully nearby, already seeking its mother. The third calf was gone, swept away in the fury of the flood. But they had survived, and in doing so, proved something essential about the partnership they were building. "Let's go home," Ellie said, helping Nathan to his feet. Together they made their slow way back to the ranch, soaked and battered, but unbroken. The storm raged for 2 more days, keeping them confined to the house. The creek overflowed its banks, cutting off access to town and turning the lower pastures into temporary lakes. Inside, they took stock of their situation, both the immediate challenges of the storm and the larger threat posed by Chambers and the railroad. "We need allies," Nathan said on the evening of the second day as they gathered around the kitchen table. "People who will stand with us against Chambers." "Most folks in town are too afraid to speak against the railroad," Michael observed. "They control too much, the bank, shipping, even the newspaper." "What about other ranchers?" Ellie suggested. "Surely Sophia isn't the only one being pressured to sell." Nathan considered this. "There's Jackson to the north, the Wilkinsons east of town. Few others scattered about, but getting them to unite, he shook his head. Ranchers are independent by nature, suspicious of collective action. We need to show them they'll be next, Ellie insisted, that what happened to Sophia will happen to them if the railroad isn't stopped. Abigail, who had been listening silently, wrote on her slate, "What about the law?" "Sheriff Wallace?" Michael snorted. "He's in Chambers' pocket, takes his orders direct from the bank." "Not the sheriff," Ellie said slowly, an idea forming. "The federal government. The railroad is crossing state lines using interstate commerce. That puts them under federal jurisdiction." Nathan looked skeptical. "You think the government will care about a few small ranchers in Wyoming territory?" "They'll care about fraud, theft, and arson," Ellie countered, "especially if those crimes are committed to manipulate railroad land acquisitions." A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Finally, Nathan nodded. "It's worth trying. When the road's clear, I'll ride to Cheyenne, send telegrams to the territorial governor and the federal marshal." "I'm coming with you," Ellie said firmly. Nathan's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "I assumed you would." The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Fields lay underwater, fences were down, and debris was scattered everywhere. But as the sun emerged, it revealed the resilience of the land. Already, shoots of new green poked through the mud, promising renewal. Sophia and Miguel returned, relieved to find their friends safe but bearing grim news. Their temporary shelter had been damaged in the storm, and rebuilding would have to wait until the ground dried. "Stay as long as you need," Nathan told them. "We're stronger together anyway." It was a week before the roads were passable enough to attempt the journey to Cheyenne. In that time, they worked from dawn to dusk, repairing storm damage, moving cattle to dry ground, salvaging what crops they could. Each night, exhausted, they gathered around the kitchen table to refine their plan against Chambers. Finally, the day came for the trip to town. Nathan and Ellie set out at first light, leaving Michael, Abigail, and the Riveras to watch over the ranch. "Be careful," Abigail signed to Ellie before they left. "Chambers has eyes everywhere." "We will," Ellie promised, touched by the girl's concern. The ride to Cheyenne was arduous, the road still muddy and rutted from the storm. Several times they had to dismount and lead the horses around washouts or fallen trees. By the time the town came into view, both riders and mounts were splattered with mud and weary from the journey. Cheyenne showed signs of the storm's fury as well. Buildings had lost shingles, fences were down, and the main street was a river of mud. Still, the town was alive with activity, merchants repairing storefronts, cowboys driving cattle, women hanging wash that had been soaked in flooded cellars. Telegraph office first, Nathan decided, then the land office to check records. They had just turned their horses toward the telegraph office when a familiar voice called out, "Why, Miss Sinclair, what a delightful surprise." Ellie's heart sank. Robert Chambers stood on the boardwalk outside the Cattleman's Bank, immaculate in a gray suit despite the mud surrounding him. Beside him, equally well-dressed, stood James Parker. "Gentlemen," Nathan acknowledged stiffly, dismounting to help Ellie down. "Hayes," Chambers nodded, "we missed you at the town meeting yesterday. Important decisions were made about the railroad right-of-way." "I wasn't aware of any meeting," Nathan replied. "Oh? The notices were posted last week. Of course, with the storm," Chambers shrugged eloquently. "No matter, the vote proceeded without you. I'm pleased to report that the town council unanimously approved the new route, right through Whispering Pines." Ellie felt Nathan tense beside her. "The council has no authority over private land," he said evenly. "Perhaps not directly," Chambers conceded, "but they do have influence with the Territorial Commission, and the Commission has authorized eminent domain proceedings for the railroad's benefit." "Eminent domain?" Ellie echoed, appalled. "You can't just seize people's land." "With fair compensation, my dear," Parker interjected smoothly. "It's all quite legal." "There's nothing legal about burning people out of their homes," Nathan countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or cutting fences, or rustling cattle to force sales." Chambers raised an eyebrow. "Serious accusations. Do you have proof?" "We will, though," Ellie promised. "And when we do, we'll take it straight to the federal marshal." "Ah, the federal marshal." Chambers smiled thinly. "I had a most illuminating conversation with him just yesterday." regarding a certain sergeant who was court-martialed for cowardice, then fled west to escape his shame. The marshal found the story quite concerning. Nathan's face hardened. Is that a threat, Chambers? Merely an observation. Wyoming has little patience for cowards and Hayes. Once the full story circulates, you'll find even fewer allies than you have now. Chambers tipped his hat. Good day to you both. Parker, shall we? The two men strolled away, leaving Nathan and Ellie standing in the muddy street, their plans already compromised. He knew we were coming, Ellie said quietly. Someone must have seen us on the road. Nathan nodded grimly. And now he's poisoning the well with the marshal. We need to move quickly. They proceeded to the telegraph office, where Nathan sent messages to the territorial governor in the Department of Justice in Washington. The operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, gave them a curious look as he tapped out the messages. Might be some delay in these getting through, he warned. Lines are down south of Laramie, storm damage. How long? Nathan asked. The operator shrugged. Could be days, could be longer. Next, they visited the land office, seeking records of recent property transfers. The clerk, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, grew visibly uncomfortable when they asked about the railroad's acquisitions. Those records are restricted, he stammered, by order of the bank. The bank doesn't control public records, Ellie objected. In theory, no, the clerk admitted. In practice, he glanced around furtively, then leaned closer. Look, I need this job, but if you come back after closing, say 5 o'clock, the office will be empty. The records cabinet isn't locked. Understanding dawned. Thank you, Ellie said quietly. The clerk straightened, resuming his official manner. I'm afraid I can't help you. Good day. Outside, Nathan looked troubled. Chambers has the town locked down tighter than I thought. We should head back to the ranch, warn the others. Not yet, Ellie insisted. We need those land records. They might show a pattern of fraud we can use against the railroad. Nathan studied her determined expression and nodded. All right, we'll wait until closing. They spent the intervening hours attending to other business, purchasing supplies, visiting the gunsmith to repair Nathan's rifle, stopping at the church to speak with Reverend Edwards about their intention to marry. The minister received them with poorly concealed surprise. You're still here, Miss Sinclair? I had assumed. Well, given Mr. Hayes' history with these arrangements. We're to be married next week, Ellie stated firmly. We'd like you to perform the ceremony. Reverend Edwards glanced between them, his expression thoughtful. I see. And this is a decision made freely by both parties? It is, Nathan confirmed, his hand finding Ellie's. Then I would be honored, the minister said, his manner warming slightly. Though I must admit, Mrs. Edwards will be quite astonished. She had wagered you wouldn't last a fortnight, Miss Sinclair. I'm more resilient than I appear, Ellie replied with a small smile. As they left the church, Nathan's expression was lighter than it had been all day. Next week, then, he said, squeezing her hand. You're sure? More certain than I've ever been about anything, Ellie assured him. At precisely 5 o'clock, they returned to the land office. The building was deserted, just as the clerk had promised. While Nathan kept watch at the window, Ellie quickly located the records cabinet. Here, she whispered, pulling out a leather-bound ledger labeled Property Transfers, 1872-1873. Together, they pored over the entries, looking for patterns. What emerged was damning. Dozens of properties had been transferred to the Eastern Pacific Railroad Company in recent months, many for well below market value. Several transfers were marked foreclosure, others as voluntary sale. Look at this, Ellie pointed to an entry from March. The Rivera property is listed as pending transfer due to tax default. Sophia pays her taxes religiously, Nathan frowned. I've ridden with her to the assessor's office myself. And here's Whispering Pines, Ellie continued, finding their ranch in the ledger. Also listed as pending, due to mortgage default. But the payment isn't due for another month, Nathan objected. They're fabricating reasons to seize the land, Ellie realized, creating paper trails to make the takeovers look legal. They carefully copied the most damning entries, then replaced the ledger exactly as they'd found it. As they slipped out the back door, Ellie felt a mixture of triumph and dread. They had evidence now, but also confirmation that Chambers' reach had extended throughout the town's institutions. We should stay at the hotel tonight, Nathan suggested as they collected their horses. Head back at first light. Ellie nodded, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The streets were emptying as dusk fell, and she felt watched, though she could see no one paying them particular attention. The Cheyenne Hotel was a three-story building of red brick, one of the town's more substantial establishments. The clerk barely glanced at them as he assigned them separate rooms on the second floor. Nathan insisted on escorting Ellie to her door before retiring to his own room across the hall. Lock your door, he advised. I don't trust Chambers not to try something. You think he knows what we found? Ellie asked. I think he assumes we're trouble, Nathan replied grimly. That's enough. Alone in her room, Ellie tried to settle her racing thoughts. The evidence they'd uncovered was compelling. But would it be enough? And could they trust the territorial authorities, given Chambers' obvious influence? She was just preparing for bed when a soft knock sounded at her door. Wary, she approached. Who is it? Sophia Rivera, came the surprising reply. May I come in? Ellie opened the door to find not only Sophia, but also her brother Carlos, a tall man with a stern face and the same dark, intelligent eyes as his sister. What are you doing here? Ellie asked, ushering them in and quickly closing the door. Warning you, Tal, Sophia said urgently. Chambers knows you've been to the land office. His men are watching the hotel. How did you know we were here? Ellie questioned. Michael rode to our ranch this morning after you left, Carlos explained. He was worried about Parker having spies on the road. We've been in town since noon, watching out for you. We need to leave, Sophia added. Now before they make their move. I have to get Nathan, Ellie said, already reaching for her shawl. No need, came Nathan's voice from the connecting door between their rooms. He stepped through, fully dressed, his rifle in hand. I heard everything. We'll go out the back way. They descended the hotel's rear staircase in silence, emerging into an alley illuminated only by the faint glow of distant street lamps. Carlos led them to where 4 horses waited, held by a boy who couldn't have been more than 12. My son, Diego, Sophia introduced quickly. He's been watching the stables. 4 men came looking for your horses an hour ago, the boy reported in accented English. They put something in their feed bags. I switched them with other horses after they left. Smart boy, Nathan approved. Let's ride, stay off the main roads. They slipped out of town by a circuitous route, avoiding the main streets where Chambers' men might be watching. Once clear of Cheyenne, they pushed their horses to a fast trot, eating up the miles between them and Whispering Pines. How did you know Chambers was planning something tonight? Ellie asked Sophia as they rode. I've been watching him for months, Sophia replied, ever since he first came to my ranch with his offers. I have sources in town, people who owe me favors. My sister has many friends among those the respectable citizens of Cheyenne prefer to ignore, Carlos added with a hint of pride. Maids, stable boys, saloon girls, they see everything, hear everything. And what they saw today was Chambers gathering his men, Sophia continued, giving orders. Your names were mentioned. Nathan rode close beside Ellie, his expression troubled. We're running out of time. Once Chambers realizes we have evidence of fraud, he'll accelerate his plans. Then we accelerate ours, Ellie decided. We need to rally the other ranchers. Today, now. At night? Sophia questioned. Chambers won't expect it, Ellie explained. He'll think we're running scared, hiding at the ranch. Instead, we'll be building an alliance. Nathan studied her in the moonlight, admiration clear in his eyes. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm practical, Ellie corrected, and I don't like bullies. They rode hard through the night, stopping first at the Rivera Ranch where Miguel and Diego remained, then continuing to Whispering Pines. Michael and Abigail rushed out to meet them, relief evident on their faces. Thank God, Michael exclaimed. We were worried when you didn't return. No time to explain now, Nathan said, dismounting. We need to split up, ride to every ranch in the valley, get everyone to meet at Whispering Pines tomorrow at noon. What do we tell them? Michael asked. That the railroad is coming for their land next, Ellie answered, and that we have proof of Chambers' fraud. They worked quickly, assigning territories and rehearsing the message. Nathan would ride north to the Jackson spread, Michael east to the Wilkinsons, Carlos south to the smaller homesteads scattered along the foothills. Sophia would return to her ranch to gather what remained of their documentation, while Ellie and Abigail prepared the house for the meeting. As the men prepared to leave, Ellie pulled Nathan aside. "Be careful," she urged. "Chambers might have men watching the roads." "I always am," he assured her, then hesitated. "Eleanor, if something happens to me—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Nothing will happen. We're in this together, remember?" His response was to pull her close and kiss her, a brief but fierce affirmation of everything unspoken between them. Then he was gone, riding into the darkness with the others. Ellie and Abigail worked through the night, preparing food for the expected guests, arranging the front room for the meeting, organizing the evidence they'd collected. By dawn, everything was ready. One by one, the men returned, bringing news of cautious acceptance from the neighboring ranchers. Some had already suffered accidents similar to those at Whispering Pines and the Rivera Ranch. Others had received visits from railroad representatives, offering suspiciously low prices for their land. All were concerned, if not yet convinced, of the need for unified action. "They'll come," Nathan reported, exhaustion evident in his face after the night's ride. "Whether they all act together is another matter." "They will when they see what we've found," Ellie assured him, showing him the neat stack of documents they'd organized. Land records, witness statements, a timeline of suspicious events. By noon, the yard was filled with horses and wagons. Ranchers from across the valley, some who hadn't spoken to each other in years, gathered in Nathan's front room. Men in worn denim sat beside women in practical calico, all with the weather-beaten faces and calloused hands of those who wrested their living from the Wyoming earth. Nathan stood before them, his voice steady as he laid out what they discovered: the pattern of intimidation, the fraudulent records, the complicity of town officials. Ellie watched the faces of their neighbors, seeing skepticism gradually give way to anger as the evidence mounted. "So what do we do?" Jackson, a burly rancher from the North Valley, finally asked. "The railroad's got money, lawyers, men with guns. We're just farmers and ranchers." "We stand together," Ellie said, stepping forward. "We document every threat, every accident. We send evidence to the territorial governor, the federal marshal, newspapers in Denver and Salt Lake City. We make so much noise that they can't ignore us." "And if that doesn't work?" Wilkinson, an older man with a silver beard, challenged. "Then we defend what's ours," Carlos Rivera declared, "as our fathers did before us." A murmur of agreement ran through the room. These were frontier people accustomed to hardship and self-reliance. The idea of collective action might be foreign, but defending home and property was a concept they understood viscerally. "We need a plan," Nathan said, bringing them back to practicalities. "Ways to watch each other's backs, share information, coordinate our response if Chambers escalates." For the next 2 hours, they hammered out the details of their alliance: patrols to watch property lines, a system of signals if help was needed, designated messengers to carry news between ranches. By late afternoon, they had a strategy that just might, be enough to hold off the railroad until legal help arrived. As the meeting broke up, Nathan pulled Ellie aside. "This was your idea," he said quietly. "Getting everyone together like this. I wouldn't have thought of it." "Yes, you would," Ellie replied. "Eventually, I just speeded things up." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Have I told you lately that I'm grateful you came instead of your sister?" "You might have mentioned it," Ellie teased, "but I wouldn't mind hearing it again." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted outside. They rushed to the porch to find Michael pointing toward the road, where a cloud of dust announced approaching riders. "At least a dozen," he reported grimly. "Coming fast." Nathan's expression hardened. "Chambers," he said. "He's decided to force the issue." The ranchers who had been preparing to leave now gathered in the yard, hands moving instinctively to weapons. Women and children were quickly ushered into the house, where Abigail guided them to the back rooms, furthest from potential danger. "No one fires unless fired upon," Nathan instructed, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded in battle. "We stand our ground, but we don't provoke." The riders approached at a gallop, only slowing when they saw the assembly waiting for them. At their head rode Robert Chambers, flanked by James Parker and several men Ellie recognized from town, the sheriff among them. "Quite a gathering, Hayes," Chambers called as they pulled up. "Planning a barn raising? Or perhaps a lynching?" Just neighbors visiting neighbors, Nathan replied evenly. What brings you out this way, Chambers? Official business. Chambers nodded to the sheriff, who produced a document from his vest pocket. Nathan Hayes, the sheriff recited, clearly uncomfortable under the collective gaze of the ranchers. You are hereby ordered to vacate this property within 24 hours. The land has been claimed under eminent domain for the Eastern Pacific Railroad, pursuant to territorial authority. A stunned silence followed the announcement, broken only when Nathan stepped forward to examine the document. This isn't legal, he said after scanning it. The Territorial Commission can't authorize seizure without due process. There's been no hearing, no opportunity to contest. The hearing was held yesterday, Parker interjected smoothly. You were notified but failed to appear. The commission ruled in the railroad's favor. That's a lie, Ellie exclaimed. There was no notification. Perhaps it went astray in the recent storm, Chambers suggested with mock concern. Regardless, the ruling stands. Whispering Pines now belongs to the Eastern Pacific Railroad Company. Nathan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Jackson pushed forward. If Hayes goes, we all go, the big rancher declared, and we won't go quietly. Murmurs of agreement rose from the assembled ranchers. Men shifted position, hands resting meaningfully on rifle stocks or pistol butts. The air crackled with tension. I'd advise against resistance, Chambers said coldly. The sheriff here has authority to deputize as many men as needed to enforce the order. And I'd advise against forcing a confrontation you can't win, Carlos Rivera countered. There are 30 armed men here, Chambers. How many did you bring? 10? 12? Chambers' eyes narrowed as he assessed the determined faces before him. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. This isn't over, Hayes, he said finally. You have 24 hours. After that, we return with more men, many more. We'll be waiting, Nathan replied steadily. With a sharp gesture, Chambers wheeled his horse around, the others following. They rode away at a more measured pace than they had arrived, dignity somewhat salvaged by the deliberate retreat. Once they were out of sight, the tension in the yard released like a long-held breath. Men clasped each other's shoulders. Women emerged from the house. Children ran to their parents. We won the first round, Nathan acknowledged to the group, but Chambers will be back, just as he said, with more men. Maybe hired guns from Cheyenne or Laramie. Then we'd best be ready, Wilkinson decided. I've got 4 sons and 2 hired hands. We'll come back at dawn, bring supplies to last a siege if needed. One by one, the other ranchers made similar pledges. By the time the last wagon pulled away, Whispering Pines had the promise of over 40 defenders by morning. Inside the house, Nathan, Ellie, and their closest allies gathered to plan their defense. A map of the ranch was spread on the table, positions marked, supplies inventoried. We should send another telegram to the governor, Ellie suggested. Tell him what's happening, that Chambers is raising a private army. The telegraph operator won't send it, Sophia predicted. He's too afraid. Then we send a rider to the next town, Ellie persisted. We can't just fight, we need to keep pursuing legal remedies as well. As they debated strategy, a noise at the window made them all turn. A rock had been thrown through the glass, wrapped in paper. Nathan retrieved it, unfolding the note with growing anger. Chambers has taken Abigail, he read, his voice shaking with controlled fury. What? Ellie gasped. How? When? Nathan handed her the note. Hayes, your sister is safe for now. Surrender the ranch by dawn, and she will be returned unharmed. Resist, and you will never see her again. She was just here, Michael said, confused, during the confrontation. They searched the house, calling Abigail's name with increasing desperation. In her room, they found signs of a struggle, an overturned chair, her slate broken on the floor. The back door, Carlos discovered. Someone forced it while we were all watching Chambers at the front. Nathan stood in Abigail's room, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. I have to go after her, he said finally, alone. If I bring men, Chambers might... He couldn't finish the thought. You can't face them alone, Ellie objected. It's exactly what Chambers wants. She's my sister, Nathan said simply. My responsibility. I can't risk her life. Then I'm coming with you, Ellie declared. Don't argue, Nathan. You need someone to watch your back. For a moment, it seemed he would refuse. Then he nodded once, decision made. We leave in an hour, after dark. While Nathan prepared the horses, Ellie changed into her most practical clothes, the riding skirt and jacket she'd acquired since coming to Wyoming. She braided her hair tightly and tucked a small derringer into her pocket, a gift from Sophia, who insisted every frontier woman needed protection. This is madness, Michael protested as they prepared to leave. At least wait for the others to return in the morning. Abigail doesn't have until morning, Nathan replied grimly. We know where Chambers is likely holding her, the railroad camp at the edge of town. If we wait, he'll have time to move her somewhere we can't find. Then we all go, Carlos insisted. No, Ellie said firmly. Someone needs to coordinate the ranchers when they arrive. And she hesitated, if we don't come back, you'll need to lead them. The weight of unspoken possibilities hung in the air. Finally, Sophia stepped forward and embraced Ellie fiercely. Vaya con Dios, she whispered. Bring our girl home. They rode out under a canopy of stars, the spring night cool and clear after the recent storms. Nathan set a punishing pace, his face set in lines of grim determination. They avoided the main road, taking less traveled paths through the hills, using Nathan's intimate knowledge of the terrain to approach Cheyenne from an unexpected direction. The railroad camp was established on the outskirts of town, a collection of tents and temporary structures where workers, surveyors, and company men were housed. Light from lanterns created pools of illumination in the darkness, and the sounds of men talking and laughing carried clearly through the night air. They left the horses concealed in a stand of trees and approached on foot, staying low and moving carefully from shadow to shadow. Nathan pointed out the largest tent at the center of the camp, likely Chambers' headquarters. I'll create a distraction at the far end, he whispered. When they're occupied, you slip in and look for Abby. And if she's not there? Ellie asked. Then we keep looking, Nathan answered grimly. Every tent, every building, until we find her. The plan was simple, perhaps too simple, but they had little choice. Nathan circled the camp while Ellie waited, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The distraction, when it came, was more effective than she'd anticipated. A series of small explosions, likely dynamite from the railroad's own stores, erupted at the far end of the camp, sending men running toward the commotion. In the chaos, Ellie darted toward Chambers' tent, slipping inside unnoticed. The interior was surprisingly luxurious, a carpeted floor, a proper bed, a desk with a lamp still burning, but no Abigail. Ellie was about to leave when voices outside froze her in place. Check my quarters, Chambers was ordering someone. Make sure nothing's been taken. Trapped, Ellie looked frantically for a hiding place. The space beneath the bed was her only option. She dove underneath just as the tent flap opened. Chambers entered, accompanied by Parker, and Ellie's blood ran cold. A bound and gagged Abigail. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, but there was defiance in them too as she was roughly seated in a chair. Your brother is becoming quite troublesome, Miss Hayes, Chambers said conversationally, though I must admire his predictability. Create a distraction at one end of the camp, try to rescue you from the other. Classic military thinking, he chuckled. Unfortunately for him, we anticipated such a move. You won't get away with this, Parker added, adjusting his cufflinks with affected nonchalance. Hayes and that interfering woman of his have caused enough trouble. It ends tonight. From her hiding place, Ellie could see Abigail's feet, the ropes binding her ankles to the chair legs. The girl was working at them subtly, using the edge of her boot heel to fray the fibers. Brave, clever Abigail, fighting even now. The tent flap opened again, and a man Ellie didn't recognize entered. We got him, he reported. Caught him trying to sneak into the storage tent. Excellent, Chambers approved. Bring him in. Moments later, Nathan was thrust into the tent, his hands bound behind him, a cut bleeding freely above his eye. He stumbled but remained standing, his gaze immediately finding Abigail. Are you all right? He asked her. When she nodded, some of the tension left his shoulders. A touching reunion, Chambers observed sardonically. Though incomplete, I fear. Where is Miss Sinclair? Safe, Nathan replied tersely. Beyond your reach. I doubt that, Chambers circled Nathan like a predator. She's too loyal to let you face danger alone, which means she's either captured elsewhere in the camp or... His gaze swept the tent, lingering on the bed. Ellie held her breath, pressing herself against the floor. No matter, Chambers decided. We'll find her eventually. In the meantime, let's discuss your surrender, Hayes. The ranch in exchange for your life and your sister's. You know I can't do that, Nathan said steadily. The ranch isn't just mine. It's home to others now, a future for Abigail, for Eleanor. I won't trade that away, not even for my life. Noble but foolish, Chambers sighed. I'd hoped to resolve this cleanly, but you leave me no choice. He drew a pistol from his coat. I'm afraid there will be a tragic accident tonight. A known troublemaker, breaking into the railroad camp, shot while resisting arrest. And my sister? Nathan asked, his voice tight. A regrettable casualty, Parker suppliced smoothly, caught in the crossfire. Abigail's eyes widened in terror, but Nathan's expression remained calm. You won't get away with this, he said. The ranchers are united now. They know what you've done, what you're planning. Kill us, and they'll come for you. Perhaps, Chambers conceded, but by then the railroad will control the valley. Progress, Hayes. It can't be stopped. He raised the pistol, aiming squarely at Nathan's chest. In that moment, several things happened at once. Abigail, having worked 1 foot free, kicked out violently, catching Parker in the knee. He went down with a shout of pain. Simultaneously, the lamp on the desk suddenly tipped over, pushed by Ellie's hand, snaking out from under the bed, spilling oil across the carpeted floor. Flames leaped up instantly, catching the canvas walls. Chambers wheeled in confusion, his shot going wide. Ellie rolled from beneath the bed, her small derringer pointed at him. Drop it, she commanded, or the next fire starts in your chest. Surprise flickered across Chambers' face, followed by calculation. You won't shoot, he said. You don't have it in you. Try me, Ellie replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I've watched you terrorize good people, burn out a family, kidnap a girl. I think I can live with putting a bullet in you. Something in her tone must have convinced him. Chambers slowly lowered his weapon. The ropes, Parker, Ellie directed. Untie them both. Parker, still nursing his injured knee, glared at her. The tent's on fire, you fool woman. We'll all burn. Then I suggest you work quickly, Ellie countered. With obvious reluctance, Parker freed Abigail, then Nathan. The moment his hands were loose, Nathan disarmed Chambers, reversing their positions. Get Abby out of here, he told Ellie. I'll be right behind you. The fire was spreading rapidly, the dry canvas igniting like tinder. Smoke filled the tent, making breathing difficult. Ellie grabbed Abigail's hand, leading her toward the entrance. Outside, the camp was in chaos. Men ran in all directions, some fighting the fire, others simply fleeing. In the confusion, Ellie and Abigail slipped away, making for the trees where they'd left the horses. They had just reached the tree line when shots rang out behind them. Ellie turned to see Nathan running toward them, pursued by several men. More shots, and Nathan stumbled, clutching his side. Go, he shouted to them. Get to the horses! Instead, Ellie drew her derringer again and fired toward the pursuers. The small weapon had limited range, but it created enough distraction for Nathan to regain his feet and continue running. Together, they reached the horses and mounted, Nathan grimacing with pain as he pulled himself into the saddle. They rode hard, not daring to slow until they were miles from town, the glow of the fire just a faint orange smudge against the night sky behind them. Finally, in a sheltered hollow, they stopped to assess Nathan's wound. Abigail held the lantern while Ellie examined the injury, a bullet grazed along his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. You came back for us, Abigail signed, her hands trembling with emotion. Both of you. Of course we did, Ellie replied, bandaging Nathan's side with strips torn from her petticoat. We're family. The simple words seemed to hang in the air between them. Family. Not by blood or law yet, but by choice. By the bonds forged in shared danger and sacrifice. Chambers and Parker? Nathan asked as Ellie finished tending his wound. I don't know, she admitted. Last I saw, they were still in the tent, but the fire was spreading quickly. We should keep moving, Nathan decided, though his face was pale with pain. They'll send riders after us once the fire's under control. They rode through the night, taking a circuitous route back to Whispering Pines. Dawn was breaking as they finally crested the ridge overlooking the ranch. The sight that greeted them brought them to a stunned halt. The yard was filled with men and horses. Not Chambers' threatened force, but the ranchers who had pledged to defend Whispering Pines. More were arriving even as they watched, wagons carrying families, men on horseback, a few elderly neighbors in buggies. They came, Nathan said, wonder in his voice. All of them. Of course they did, Ellie replied. You stood for them. Now they're standing for you. As they rode down to the ranch, cheers went up from the gathered neighbors. Michael rushed forward to help Nathan dismount, while Sophia embraced Abigail tearfully. Carlos and the other men crowded around, eager for news. Chambers took Abby, Nathan explained briefly. We got her back. There was a fire at the railroad camp. I don't know if Chambers and Parker escaped. They did, a new voice announced. All heads turned toward the road, where a dust-covered rider was approaching. As he came closer, Ellie recognized the nervous clerk from the land office in Cheyenne. Mr. Reed, she said in surprise, what are you doing here? The clerk dismounted wearily. Bringing news in this. He handed Nathan an official-looking document. The territorial governor received your telegrams. He's ordered an immediate investigation into the Eastern Pacific's land acquisitions. All eminent domain proceedings are suspended pending the outcome. A cheer went up from the gathered ranchers. Nathan studied the document, his expression moving from disbelief to cautious hope. And Chambers? He asked. Fled, Reed reported. Him and Parker both. The fire destroyed half the railroad camp, including most of their records. When word of the governor's investigation arrived this morning, they took the first train east. The sheriff's looking for them now. Seems Parker had outstanding warrants in Nebraska. Ellie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It's over, she breathed. They're gone. For now, Nathan cautioned. The railroad still wants this land. They'll send others. And we'll be ready, Carlos declared, the other ranchers voicing agreement. As the news spread through the gathered crowd, the mood shifted from tense readiness to celebration. Women unpacked food from wagons, children ran playing between the buildings, men gathered in groups to discuss joint patrols and mutual aid. In the midst of the impromptu festival, Nathan pulled Ellie aside, leading her to the quiet of the front porch. I had something planned, he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. For after all this was resolved, a proper proposal with a ring and everything? Nathan Hayes, Ellie said, smiling up at him. Are you saying this isn't how you plan to ask me to marry you? With a bullet wound in your side and half the valley watching? A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. Not exactly, no. Good, Ellie declared, because I'm asking you instead. She took his hands in hers. Nathan Hayes, will you marry me? Today, now with all our friends here to witness? For a moment, he seemed too stunned to respond. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features with joy. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I will. They were married that very afternoon in the front yard of Whispering Pines Ranch. Reverend Edwards, hastily fetched from town, performed the ceremony. Abigail stood beside Ellie, beaming with happiness. Michael and Carlos flanked Nathan, proud as brothers. As the sun began to set, casting the ranch in the golden light that had first welcomed Ellie a month ago, the newlyweds stood together on the porch, watching their friends and neighbors celebrating on the land they had fought to defend. Not how I imagined starting our life together, Nathan admitted, his arm around Ellie's waist. No, Ellie agreed. It's better, real. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming. Before them stretched the land they would work together, the community they had helped unite. And between them grew the love that had surprised them both. A love born not of romantic illusions or convenient arrangements, but of shared struggle and mutual respect. What are you thinking? Nathan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Ellie smiled, leaning into his embrace. That sometimes what looks like second choice turns out to be the only right choice all along. Not second choice, Nathan corrected softly. Just a choice that took a little longer to find its way home. As the stars began to appear in the Wyoming sky, Ellie Hayes stood beside her husband, surrounded by friends who had become family, on land that had become home. In the distance, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising new storms, new challenges in the days ahead. But after weathering the tempest that had brought them together, Ellie felt no fear. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, and in that certainty, she found a peace she had never known before.